You know, my first exposure to jazz really, well, it really wasn't jazz, but I found myself when I was very young. When I was listening to the radio, I was always drawn to the instrumentals. You know, whether it was Wipeout or something like that. Wasn't the vocalist that I was really, my ear was tuned to. It was really instrumentals. And I started playing some guitar in grade school and had a rock and roll band. You know, we played tunes by the Byrds and things like that. But then I guess in junior high school is when I really I got into blues pretty heavily, Chicago blues, Michael Bloomfield, Muddy Waters, B.B. King. And then from there I kind of evolved into funkier jazz, you know, Fathead Newman, Jack McDuff, Eddie Harris, Les McCann, and kind of came into jazz that way. And then I, you know, bought my first Coltrane record and, you know, live at the Village Vanguard. And when I heard Spiritual and Softly as in a Morning Sunrise, it sort of knocked me on my butt. I still haven't gotten up. Well, I started out as a musician. As I say, I started playing some guitar in grade school. I switched over to bass in junior high school and high school, and basically played in rock and roll bands. And we would play school parties and school dances and things like that. I don't know whether I don't remember getting paid or not, but I think we actually did a little bit. And then when I was about 18, I started playing the flute, and that's when I really got into jazz and you know, performing, put a band together. So I've always, in addition to my production and artistic direction duties, I'm still a working musician. Not that much anymore, but for a number of years in my early 20s, you know, while I was producing shows at Kuumbwa, you know, I was still gigging in bands, you know, 5 and 6 nights a week. Now it's just more weekend kind of stuff.
Weekend warrior.
Weekend warrior. I think for the presenting side of jazz, my first experience was with Pete Douglas at the Bach Dancing and Dynamite Society. I was living in Santa Cruz, surfing, playing music, going to college, and I was living in my Volkswagen bus. This was 1973. And I was going to take some recording engineer classes at the College of San Mateo. And I needed to find a place to live. And so a friend of mine knew this eccentric guy up at the beach in Half Moon Bay, Pete Douglas, who had this music program, and he told me that, well, I bet you Pete would let you, since you love jazz and he loves jazz, he'd probably just let you park your bus in his yard somewhere and kind of camp out. So he took me up and introduced me, and we got to be good friends. And so he said, sure, why don't you just park your bus here, and in exchange you can be the janitor after the jazz programs and take the money at the door on Sunday afternoons, because he did Sunday afternoon jazz shows. So that was really my first experience. That's where I met, you know, Bill Evans and Herb Ellis and Barney Kessel and all these different musicians. So that was really my first entry into music production. So I lived up there with Pete for about 6 months and got some great experience. And then I left the country for about a year surfing and traveling around in Australia and New Zealand and the South Pacific. But then when I came back at the beginning of '75, I had a friend that talked about wanting to start a nonprofit jazz organization, which turned out to be Kuumbwa. So him, myself, and a couple of other people formed this organization. And Pete was very helpful to us and kind of a model because he'd been doing it for a long time. Basically, and I'm proud of the fact that we still really have the same mission. It's basically to provide a home for jazz in Santa Cruz. Our goal at that time really was to develop our own venue. You know, we were just kids. We had no experience in any of this, and really very little jazz was being presented in 1975 in the not-for-profit world. It was still basically commercial clubs, commercial festivals, and not much in the not-for-profit world. So forming an organization as a 501c3 nonprofit in 1975 with a goal of developing your own facility, it was pretty unique, pretty audacious, really, when you think we were just 19, 20 years old, to try and do that. So that's what we did. We ultimately, we spent the first 2 years of the organization developing our resources, trying to raise some money until we found a little abandoned bread bakery, and that's what we developed into Kuumbwa. Well, in the mid-'70s, you and I are of similar vintage. That really wasn't a hot spot for jazz at that time. It was kind of pre Wynton Marsalis, pre Young Lions, but it was after the '60s heyday. So it was kind of a funny time and place to start a jazz organization. But oddly enough, in the community of Santa Cruz, it was a real hot spot for arts organizations. Our public radio station got going then, our Shakespeare Festival, Cabrillo Festival of Contemporary Music. There was a lot of activity in the arts in Santa Cruz County during that time. So we were able to play a role in that, and that I think really helped in our development. And plus the fact that it's a college town, 2 major colleges are in and it's always been an artistic community. So we were still able to develop an audience and a venue, despite the fact that it wasn't necessarily a real hotspot for jazz during that era. Although over the decades, as we've both seen, the kind of the jazz equity sort of rise and fall with the times, but there still has always been, remains to this day, a solid audience for what we do. We were able to present Dexter Gordon, Sonny Stitt, Art Blakey, Phil Woods, McCoy Tyner, you're exactly right, Horace Silver. They were still all out on the road working the circuit. For us, we developed a program of Monday night performances because at the time, Keystone Corner, which was one of the world's great jazz venues, was going very strong in San Francisco, and they operated 6 nights a week, Tuesday through Sunday. So Monday was the off night, and we developed a relationship with Todd Barkin, and he'd bring somebody in, and we'd come down and catch them on the Monday night, because we're about 75 miles away from San Francisco, so far enough to where it wasn't going to impact him, yet close enough to make it logistically convenient for the artist. This is Tim Jackson from the Monterey Jazz Festival and Kuumbwa Jazz. For more interviews like this, you can go to jazztimes.com.